Sometimes the cold doesn't just freeze your skin, it freezes your hope. And on that night, the cafe's glass door swung open with a sound that didn't belong, a fragile sound, a sound of someone too light, too weak, pushing against the storm. Every head in the warm cafe turned. The bell above the door gave a cheerful jingle. But the girl who stepped inside looked like she had no place in cheer. Her thin coat was soaked. Her pale hands trembled as though they had forgotten warmth. A long time ago, and in her arms, clutched tighter than life itself, was a ragged teddy bear. One eye missing, its fur matted from years of tears. She was shivering, not the kind of shivering you get after a walk in winter. The kind that sinks into your bones. The kind that speaks of nights without blankets, of streets without shelter. The cafe lights reflected in her wide, uncertain eyes. She blinked as if the glow itself was too bright. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The barista's hand paused above the coffee machine. A couple by the window lowered their mugs, whispering. And in the farthest corner, a man in a sharp black suit slowly lifted his gaze from his untouched cup. A stranger in a room full of warmth, she hesitated, like a bird that had accidentally flown into a world it didn't belong. The cafe was warmth, chatter, and comfort. She was rain, silence, and hunger. Her shoes left tiny, wet marks on the floor. She hugged her teddy tighter, almost as if asking it for permission. Tables were full, chairs pulled in. No place seemed made for her until her eyes stopped at the corner table. The man in the suit, alone, unmoving. His coffee steamed quietly, untouched. His tie perfect, his watch gleaming. A man who carried wealth like a second skin. A man who looked like he had never known cold, and yet something about his stillness felt colder than the storm outside. The question that shattered silence. The girls' steps were hesitant, uneven, each one small but heavier than anyone could imagine. When she finally reached his table, the cafe held its breath. Her voice, soft, cracked, almost not there, broke the silence. "See, can I sit here?" Her words wavered, not demanding, not even asking with expectation, just a fragile whisper, like someone who had been told no too many times already. The man in the suit looked up fully for the first time. His eyes were sharp, dark, the kind of eyes that made people look away. But tonight they lingered. For the first time in years, his carefully built walls had a crack. A CEO who didn't expect questions, Alexander Veron. That was his name, though few dared to say it out loud. CEO, millionaire, a man whose empire stretched wider than the city itself. He wasn't used to being approached. People didn't ask him things. They waited for his orders, waited for his decisions, his signature, his approval. But now this little girl, shivering, clutching a broken bear, had asked him something no boardroom had ever dared. "Can I sit here?" And for the first time in a long time, he didn't know the answer. The wait between breaths, he said nothing at first. The cafe's hum seemed to dim. Outside, snow pressed against the glass. Inside, a child's fate dangled in the space between silence and a word. Her lips trembled. Her eyes flickered down. She began to step back, ready rehearsing rejection in her tiny heart. But then, his voice, low, controlled, a voice that usually ended negotiations and set million-dollar deals. "Sit," just one word, and yet it carried more weight than any order he had given before. A chair pulled out by Feichi pulled the chair slowly, carefully, as if afraid it might disappear if she moved too fast. The teddy bear rested on her lap, her small frame nearly swallowed by the oversized chair. She didn't look at him at first. Instead, her eyes darted to the steam rising from his untouched coffee. The warmth she couldn't have, the kind of comfort that was never meant for her, and for reasons he couldn't explain. Alexander pushed his cup slightly toward her side of the table. Her eyes widened. She didn't reach for it, but she smiled barely. The first crack of light through a storm. The order that changed everything. Alexander raised his hand. The barista, startled, hurried over. "One hot chocolate," he said. His tone was flat, but his eyes betrayed him. The girl blinked, confused. She hadn't asked for anything. No one had offered her anything in a very long time. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The barista nodded, rushing to prepare the drink, and Alexander leaned back, studying her. A stranger, a child, someone who had stepped into his carefully guarded solitude and dared to ask for a seat. The moment suspended when the mug was placed in front of her, steam curling upward. She froze. Her fingers hovered above it, trembling not from the cold, this time, but from disbelief. She looked at him, as if asking silently, why, but he gave no explanation, only a simple gesture, a nod, permission, and in that single moment, a life began to change, hers and his. Sometimes the loudest silence is when the world is watching you, waiting to see what happens next. The cafe had gone strangely quiet. Forks hovered mid-air. Spoons rested against half-finished cups. Every customer, every waiter, every passing glance, it all seemed to lock onto the small girl and the man she had chosen to sit beside. A poor child in torn clothes, her shoes damp from the rain, clutching a teddy that looked older than she was, and across from her Alexander Grant, a man whose face was splashed across business magazines, a CEO whose single decision could move markets to worlds. One table. She sat stiffly, her hand shaking as she held the mug of hot chocolate he had ordered for her. The steam rose into her face, fogging her lashes. She didn't drink yet, almost as if she thought the cup might vanish if she blinked. Alexander watched, his sharp jaw clenched, the way it always did in board meetings when he was calculating risk. But this wasn't business. This was something else. He leaned back in his chair, his voice low. "You're shivering. Drink before it gets cold." The girl blinked up at him, eyes wide and glassy. It's for me." For a second, his mask slipped. He almost smiled, but it wasn't the practiced smile he gave investors. It was something raw. "Yes, it's yours." She wrapped both hands around the mug, almost hiding her face behind it, and took a careful sip. Her shoulders relaxed. A small sigh left her lips, so soft it could have been mistaken for the sound of rain outside. And in that moment, Alexander, who had dined with presidents and kings, felt something he hadn't in years: warmth. But the cafe didn't share the warmth. At the counter, whispers began to stir. Is that really Alexander Grant? Why is a man like him letting that child sit with him? She looks homeless. This doesn't make sense. The murmurs grew, and though no one dared approach, the judgment hung thick in the air. Alexander heard them. Of course he did. He had lived his life under scrutiny, headlines dissecting his every move. Yet, strangely, for the first time, he didn't care. He looked at the girl instead. Her small fingers stroked the teddy bear in her lap, smoothing its worn fur. She whispered something under her breath. "What did you say?" he asked. She hesitated. "I was telling Mr. Teddy, he doesn't have to be scared anymore, because Because maybe tonight we won't be cold. The words hit him harder than any shareholder's accusation. That teddy bear he noticed now was patched in 3 places. The stitches were crooked, done by hand, maybe by a mother who had nothing but thread and love. "Where's your family?" he asked quietly. Her lips trembled. "Mama's not here. She said to be brave, and I tried, but it's so cold outside." She didn't cry. That was what broke him most. She had already learned to swallow tears, because tears didn't buy bread. Alexander's throat tightened. His empire was built on controlling markets, controlling people, controlling himself. But control was slipping. Her words were loosening something locked inside him for decades. For the first time in years, he remembered his own childhood, nights when his mother worked 2 jobs, and he waited in dark rooms, hungry but too proud to admit it, nights when he swore he would never be powerless again. That promise had made him ruthless, had turned him into the CEO everyone feared. And now, here sat a reflection of the boy he used to be, except it wasn't him, it was her. The girl held the mug with both hands, sipping slowly, as if each drop was a treasure. She peeked at him nervously. "Thank you, Mr." He cleared his throat, trying to sound detached. "What's your name?" "Clara," she whispered. "But Mama, she called me her little star." Clara. A fragile name, delicate as the girl herself. Alexander didn't reply immediately. He stared at the rain dripping down the cafe windows. His mind already moving, calculating, but not profits this time. Something deeper, something dangerous. Because in that moment, one thought had begun to form. This meeting, this child, was not an accident. The rain outside the cafe had not stopped. It drummed softly against the glass, steady and endless, like a heartbeat that refused to quiet. Inside, the warm golden lights tried to push away the storm, but a tension hung in the air, thick, unspoken, and fragile. At the small corner table, 2 lives that should never have touched were now bound by a single moment. Clara, a girl with clothes too thin for the season, sat clutching her teddy bear as if it were her last shield. Across from her, Alexander Gransharp suit, reputation of iron, watched her, with eyes that had seen everything wealth could buy. But nothing as raw as this. He didn't realize he was staring until she lowered the cup and asked softly, "Am I bothering you?" The question cut through him like glass. She said it so quietly, so used to rejection, that she expected it before it even came. Alexander shook his head. His voice, usually commanding boardrooms, was almost gentle. "No, you're not." She nodded, relief flickering across her face. Still, she looked around the cafe nervously, shrinking under the weight of stares and whispers. "People don't want me here," she murmured. Alexander glanced across the room. He saw the way strangers judged her, eyes narrowing, lips curling with disdain. They saw dirt where he saw survival. They saw weakness where he saw strength. For the first time in a long time, he felt anger, not the cold anger of business deals gone wrong, but a fire in his chest that had nothing to do with profit or loss. He leaned forward, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Clara, look at me." Her wide, frightened eyes met his. "You have every right to sit here. Do you understand? Don't ever believe you don't belong." For a moment, she just blinked. Then, slowly, the corners of her lips curved into the smallest, most fragile smile. A smile that looked as though it hadn't been allowed to exist for too long. But just as warmth began to settle at their table, the outside world intruded again. The cafe door opened, letting in a gust of cold air. Two men stepped inside dressed in expensive coats, laughter on their lips. They were board members from Alexander's own company. He recognized them instantly. "Alexander," one called, striding forward. "Didn't expect to see you here." Clara froze. Her grip on the teddy bear tightened. Alexander's mask, the one he had worn all his life, snapped back in place. His voice cooled. "Gentlemen." They approached the table, their eyes flicking curiously to the girl beside him. It didn't take long for their amusement to turn sharp. "Interesting company you're keeping," one of them murmured with a smirk. "Not your usual taste." The words dripped with mockery. Clara's cheeks burned red, and opposite him, sipping the last of her hot chocolate as if it were a treasure. Every sip was careful, reverent, like a ritual. He noticed how she held the cup with both hands, afraid it might slip away if she wasn't cautious. The small details unsettled him. He was used to reading men in negotiations, every twitch, every shift in posture. But this child wasn't hiding tells. She was made entirely of them. Her eyes revealed hunger that ran deeper than food. Her voice carried fear so worn that it had become second nature. And yet, beneath all that, there was resilience, a quiet stubbornness that said, "I will survive." No matter what. Alexander leaned back, studying her. "Clara," he said slowly, "where's your mother?" Her small hands froze around the cup. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The cafe noises seemed to hush. The clink of dishes, the hiss of the coffee machine, all of it dimmed, as though the room itself leaned closer to hear her answer. Finally, she whispered, "Mama's sick." The words trembled barely above. A breath, Alexander's chest tightened. He had expected many answers: runaway, orphan, abandoned, but not this. Not sickness. Clara stared at the teddy bear in her lap, brushing its worn ear with her thumb. She can't work. Some days she can't even get out of bed. I try to help, but her voice broke, the sound so fragile he almost wished he hadn't asked. You're the one taking care of her. Alexander realized softly. Clara nodded. Her lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. Not once. She spoke with the kind of strength children should never need. I clean, I find food. Sometimes I ask people for help. That last part landed heavy. He didn't need to ask what kind of help strangers offered or denied. Alexander felt a heat rise in his chest. Not the usual business-driven heat of frustration, but something sharper, anger, protectiveness. In the past, if an employee came to him with problems, he would calculate benefit versus risk, cost versus reward. But looking at Clara now, none of that mattered. He didn't want to measure. He wanted to act. Clara, he said carefully, why didn't you go to anyone? To the city, to a shelter? Her eyes flicked up to his, wide and wary. We did. Once they kept us for 2 nights, but Mama cried every time. She said the walls were too loud, the beds too cold, and they wanted to separate us. The fear in her voice when she said that last part cut through him like glass. I couldn't let them, she whispered fiercely. Mama needs me. If we're together, she smiles. If we're apart, Her voice broke again. She didn't finish. Alexander closed his eyes briefly, inhaling slow and steady. He had been called ruthless, heartless, cold-blooded a man who thought only in numbers. But tonight, sitting across from a girl who shouldn't have had to carry the weight of the world, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Human. A silence fell between them. Clara toyed with the teddy bear's bow, while Alexander's gaze lingered on the window, where the storm showed no sign of ending. Then, without fully realizing it, he said, "You'll bring her here tomorrow." Clara's head snapped up. "What? Your mother?" he repeated, voice firm. "Bring her here. I want to meet her." Clara's mouth parted in shock. She blinked at him, as though trying to decide if he was serious or if this was some kind of cruel trick. "Why?" she whispered. Alexander hesitated. He couldn't tell her the truth, that in this brief encounter, she had cracked something open in him he thought was sealed forever. So instead, he said, "Because no one should fight this alone. Not you, not her." Clara's lips trembled. She looked down, hiding her face, but not fast enough. He caught it just for a second, the shimmer of tears sliding free. Not tears of fear this time, but relief. And so, as the storm raged outside, a quiet pact was made at that cafe table. A man who had sworn never to let emotion dictate his actions. A girl who had learned never to trust promises. 2 lives bound now by something neither fully understood, but both would soon discover. This was only the beginning. The next day dawned grey, heavy clouds still hanging over the city as if reluctant to let go of the storm. Alexander arrived at the cafe earlier than usual. For once, his driver noticed the CEO wasn't buried in calls or emails. Instead, he sat quietly, staring at the rain-streaked window. It wasn't the market he was thinking of, nor the contracts waiting on his desk. It was Clara. The little bell above the door chimed softly. Clara stepped inside, holding her teddy bear, her shoes still damp from the puddles outside. Beside her, leaning heavily on her arm, was a woman, pale, thin, fragile as porcelain. Alexander rose immediately. His instincts told him this was Clara's mother. Her eyes, though tired and lined, carried the same quiet strength. She looked wary, as though expecting judgment. Perhaps she had seen too much of it already. But instead of questions, Alexander simply gestured to the booth he had reserved. "Sit," he said gently. "Both of you." The mother hesitated. "Sir, we don't want trouble." Alexander shook his head. "You're not in trouble." Then, to the waiter hovering nearby, he gave the order that would change everything. "Bring them a full meal, whatever they want, and make sure it's warm." The waiter blinked, surprised. Alexander rarely ordered anything but black coffee, but the CIO's tone left no room for debate. Clara's eyes widened. She looked at her mother as if to say, "See, it's real." And when the food arrived, steaming soup, fresh bread, tender meat, the woman's trembling hands wrapped around the bowl as though it was life itself, she tried to protest, whispering about cost, about how they couldn't repay. But Alexander silenced her with a look, not cold, not ruthless, a look that said, "This is not business, this is human." As they ate, something remarkable happened. The mother smiled, faint at first, then fuller, as if the warmth of the food had lit a spark inside her. Clara laughed, an unguarded, ringing laugh that filled the cafe and turned heads. And Alexander felt a weight he had carried for years slip from his shoulders. He thought of his own childhood, of hunger not of the body, but of the heart. He remembered boardrooms where affection was a weakness, and dinners where silence was louder than words. For years he had built walls so high no one could climb them. But Clara had walked in, shivering and small, and somehow stepped right through. The rain outside finally began to lift, a soft golden light breaking through the clouds. Alexander watched the girl feed a piece of bread to her mother, her face glowing with something he hadn't seen in years' hope. And it struck him then, this was not charity, this was not pity. This was the simple, undeniable truth that no empire, no wealth, no power could ever replace connection. When they finished, Clara looked up at him, eyes shining. "Thank you, Mr. E." cleared his throat, unused to gratitude that wasn't bought or bargained. "You don't need to thank me," he said. Then, softer, "just promise me something. Keep taking care of each other. That's worth more than anything else." As they left, Clara turned back one last time. She hugged the teddy bear close and smiled the kind of smile that could melt even the hardest heart. And Alexander knew, without question, that his life had shifted. It hadn't been the storm, or the cafe, or even his own decision. It had been a little girl's question, spoken through chattering teeth. "Can I sit?" A simple request. But it was also the moment were forever changed.